So we've gotten through those first few turns, and now we're moving into the mid-game. So the first big step is identifying what the heck is a mid-game. What are you even talking about? Well, I'm talking about the opening turns are passed. Every game has a different defining point where the mid-game begins and the early stages of the game end. And it's all dependent on the matchup. Control early games and control mid games can last a very long time. While two aggro decks squaring up, the early game might be over by turn 2. So it's very dependent on, all right, the early game is set up, meaning basically, did I execute the plan that I set out to do at the onset of the game? Am I following what we just talked about, looking at my hand and letting it dictate the first couple turns, and have I been able to follow and enact that game plan? Okay, now it's identifying how the game has changed. Am I still on plan by turns 3, 4, 5? Or am I off course and I need to figure out how to get things back and wrestle things back into my control? Every deck approaches this part of the game differently, so it makes it a little bit tougher to talk about. I'm going to give it my best shot. So remember, if you want to see more of this, I can jump in and talk more about any little topic in here, right? I'm trying to keep this short and digestible, but if you want to hear a deep dive on any of this, comments is the best place to let us know what more I can expand on for you. Let's start talking about the aggressive deck, right? And again, this can be as early as turn 2 or 3. You've figured it out. Okay, so what's going on now? Am I playing against control and I have to get ready for a Be Prepared or a set of Grab Your Swords or a big tink into a Grab Your Sword? That is a good question. So what do I want to do? Well, I might want to leverage things that would live through that. So maybe I'm more worried about building towards a Kuzco than I am flooding the board with a lot of small characters. Maybe it's holding those characters in my hand so that I can reload once that board wipe happens, right? Especially against the steel decks, which can go aerial, pass, turn 4, grab your sword. Or even worse, turn 4, shift a big tank. Well, I guess you can't do that turn 4, right? Because of cost. So you could do aerial turn 4, grab your sword, sing, and shift the big tank. So it's just 3 damage to everything. It kills your cats, kills your Flynn Riders. It does kind of nukes the board, right? So you need to be ready for that. Okay, they're going to nuke my board. What do I have to do? Well, you have to build up enough in the early game to make them do it, right? You have to make them do that. Like, clearly, the play pattern that they're on, they've revealed to me they have the Grab Your Sword. They have the Tinkerbell in play. So they're clearly going for the Tinkerbell, shift, grab your sword, and then Tink nukes anything that's left. So how do I play around that? Or how do I prepare myself for that is an important way to understand. That's the mid game, right? We're in the mid game now. We know what they have. We know what they're holding over turns 5 through 7. We know the direction the game's going to go. How do we pivot? Great. That's why cards that are really important in the matchup are like Friends on the other side. That's why we're starting to see purple green emerge as one of the best aggressive decks, because it has the ability to go, okay, cool, you're going to wipe the board. Well, I'm going to draw cards to make sure I have a good fresh hand of awesome threats to proceed into the late game. I'm going to start playing my Kuzcos and Mad Hatters and Genies, and you're not going to be able to keep up because now I've already been able to generate 8 to 10 lore, and now I'm just going to use 1 to 2 more characters to close out the game. And when you board wipe again, I'm going to have 1 to 2 more characters to reload. That's how the aggressive decks are approaching the mid game. The control decks are a little different, right? The control decks have now identified what they're playing against, and they are going to start executing a very slow, methodical game plan to overcome them. Is it, okay, I need to load up on threats because I need to be able to go turn 3 Rafiki, turn 5 Maui, turn 7 be prepared against the aggro decks? Or is it, okay, I'm in a mirror, so I need to get down Magic Mirror, right? One of the best cards in the mirror, to make sure I start drawing cards and inking so that in the late game, I can make sure that I have down things like Big Aladdin Pocket Watch, rush a character. I need to find my evasive threats like Goofy and Pongo to be able to generate lore through my opponent and make sure that I have that set up. Those are all really important identifiers. So you need to go, okay, how am I going to play this very late game? Or how am I going to stop the opponent from beating me in a few scant turns from now if I'm playing against an aggressive deck? Mid-range decks generally try to play both sides of it. And we see this the most obvious in the Steel and Amber decks that are playing Stitches into Rockstar Stitches, playing a whole new world. They're able to deal with the early pressure because they're playing small characters. They're playing board sweepers like Grab Your Sword, and they're also playing cards that take advantage of the control deck who are hoarding cards in their hand with Magic Mirror by playing a whole new world and go, oh, you have 8 cards in hand, I have 1, so let's just both discard our hands and draw 7. Put it on level field, except you just discarded 7 more cards than me, and you didn't get to play them. I did. I've played more cards. I'm more resource efficient. I'm ahead on tempo most likely because I've played to the board. So now you've discarded your card. Was it turn 6? Okay, cool. Discard your Be Prepared. Great, that's fantastic. Hopefully you don't draw another one and I can just have an easy W here. That's how the different decks proceed. Combo decks are kind of their own thing. They're trying to find their pieces at all costs. We see this most obviously in like the Turbo Bell style decks that generally pair with Steel, and or the Steel and Emerald decks that are trying to win via milling out the opponent with looping a whole new world. But what they're trying to do is find those cards and play those cards at the moments they really need to in order to take over the game. But the same thing, they have to identify, when do I launch this card? If I'm behind on board, playing a whole new world's lovely, but that's not going to do enough to catch me up back on the board, right? Like, there are a bunch of characters in play right now I have to deal with. And a whole new world, while good and a key point of winning the game, if I don't do that, my opponent's just going to quest for the win. So I have to be able to put characters down and stop them. So it's really important to know your role, identify when the game is begun to change via big points of swing or by lack of points of swing. You're staying perfectly on game. Like, this is great. We've all had games with an aggro deck where it's like, well, I won that game like super easy, and they're like, yeah, I didn't draw anything. I just struggled. I kept a medium hand and wasn't able to get there. It totally happens. It's understandable. So sometimes you have an easy W, but it's that inflection point where it's like, they haven't done anything yet. What do I do? Do I just play for the win? Or do I play to instead prolong the game? It's really about understanding your role in the matchup and making sure that you can do everything in your power to be prepared for what's next, or to play around something like that, or just go, okay, you know what? I'm going to put one more thing down and I'm going to try to close out the game on the next turn and just force them to have it. That's how it's going to be. It's all about knowing the opponent's deck, knowing your deck, watching what they're doing, and watching how they're playing. Are they not playing character on the board 2 turns in a row? Probably sitting on a hand of 5, 6 cards. They probably are just going to be prepared on 7. That's probably their game plan. And then you can imagine that they're probably going to follow it up with something big. Maybe it's another Be Prepared into like Maleficent Dragon. Yeah, all right. You know what I mean? That's definitely a play pattern that you can take. So be mindful of that. Be mindful when to trade things off. When you're the aggressive deck, it can suck, and you can go, listen, if I'm going to turn everything sideways, I'm going to lose them. But do I just force that to happen? There's no point in throwing down cards if you know your opponent's going to be prepared, right? Like, why would I play a bunch of drawing characters to have my opponent wipe them? Then I might as well just be discarding those cards and not playing them at all. So it's really important to understand that kind of a thing too. When is it okay to trade for lore? You know what? Take these characters all you want. All I need them to do is quest for lore one time, and that's good enough for me. I'm at 17, 16, 15. With some of these Emerald decks, those are negligible amounts. Gaining 6 lore is very easy because so many of these characters quest for 3. I don't care. I'll trade this character off all day long. I will put my Mad Hatter down. I just want to turn him sideways one time. That is all I want out of him. That is enough out of him. And it's understanding that, right? Understanding if you're at that point in the game. Or it's not enough, actually. I actually need to get down 2 of these Mad Hatters, and I need to be able to set up a Mother Knows Best so that I don't just have them eaten by a Rafiki or something they have on board that can get me. So I just need to be ready for that. I need to be extra diligent to make sure that I can execute that way. So every deck's a little different. You have to be aware of that. And if you're on the other side of things, be aware of when you can get, and even on the aggro side this is applicable, right? Be aware of when you can get multiple cards for 1. Can this Rafiki take out a Flynn Rider and then take out a Cheshire Cat and then take out something else, or put 3 damage on a Jasper? Awesome. what did that Rafiki just do? 3 ink? It took care of 2 1/3 cards? Like, that's bonkers, right? Like, that's just really good value. What other card trades like that in the game? Be prepared, grab your sword. The cards I keep talking about, these key cards in the matchup, those are things that really are impressive. Maui will often 2-for-1 because of his stats are just so big that oftentimes he'll 2-for-1. So you got to think about it this way. Are you going up cards or are you going down cards? Sometimes it's okay. You know what? My opponent's going to lose 2 characters if they elect to challenge this particular character. That's okay with me. Part of the reason why Mad Hatter is so strong in the Emerald decks is because he draws you more cards. So it's like, okay, even if they just attack and challenge one time and they take the Mad Hatter out, still drew a card. So Mad Hatter gave me 3 lore and a card for 5. In some matchups, that's awesome. In some matchups, that could not matter less. So it's about knowing, when does it matter? When is that a good time for you? And that all comes down to play patterns. What's my opponent going to do? How do I follow this up? And what pushes me towards winning? What pushes me towards spinning my wheels? Making sure you've identified, are you the beatdown? Are you no longer the beatdown? Have you become the beatdown and you need to just start jamming? The control decks now, if you go back to the beginning of Lorcana constructed play, the control decks didn't play any win conditions, basically. Like, there's like, oh, I'll get there eventually, like Aladdin will tap, Muffs and Dragon will tap enough times I can win. Now they're playing Goofies and Pongos, and they're playing, in some cases, 4 of each, so that we see a resurgence in Brave Little Tailor coming back, because they realize they actually kind of need to win the game. It's important, especially in timed round constructed play. You do have to have a win con because you have to win in time 2 times. So it's not really as easy as it was early on, when it's just, you know what, this is fine, I'll take my 1-0, this is just a really good deck, no one knows how to play against it. Now everyone kind of has learned it, and they know what they need to do, so that deck has evolved win cons. So you have to understand your role in the game. Am I the beatdown now? Am I the one who's now, I've slowed things down, I wiped the board, my opponent played nothing? Okay, well, I'm going to play a character down and pass back to them and then figure out if they can answer it, because otherwise, I'm just going to win the game, right? Like, you wipe the board, opponent plays nothing on their Emerald deck. All right, they're probably sitting on a couple Mother Knows Best or something like that. All right, cool. Well, I'm just going to play a character that, comes into play and does something. And if they bounce it, then I get to do it again, right? Like, nothing wrong with plays like that, because it's like, ooh, this is pretty good for me. Like, I'm just going to go ahead and win. I'm going to play my Ursula now. Bounce it back to my hand, terrific. I will take more of your lore and draw more cards. Thank you very much. So that is exactly the thought process.